And hello, we are live. Welcome back to episode 11 of the Endless Report. I'm joined here today by Brian. How's it going, Brian?
It's going good. I'm happy to be here. I'm also sorry to be here because it means Ben is not here and I'm a poor substitute. But I haven't done one of these in a while, so it's good to be back.
Yeah, unfortunately, Ben couldn't be here today at some prior engagements, but we're so excited to have you back, Brian. Of course, I'm Tony as well. Welcome back to the audience. And like always, we're just going to jump right into the stories like we usually do. We got a lot of interesting news this week, some news stories, some things even earlier this morning. So we're going to get right into it with some news about Take-Two and Zynga. So I'm going to pull this up here and get right into this if you want to start us off, Brian, with that.
Yeah, we've got a couple items, I think, of game industry consolidation news to kick us off this week. So this week, Take-Two and Zynga completed their merger. This story from PCGamer.com, which, at least for the moment, is the biggest gaming merger deal in history, at least until Microsoft completes the Activision Blizzard acquisition, which I think is actually quite a bit bigger than this one. But that actually, this was known for a while. It just officially went through this week. So, together, the combined company is worth about $12.7 billion and brings together, the whole range of franchises of the two companies, which includes, the GTA franchise. It includes the NBA 2K franchise, WWE, BioShock, Borderlands, Civilization. On the Take-Two side and on the Zynga side, we all know the Words with Friends and Farmvilles of the world. We also know that they've got their golf rival CSR Racing and lots of casino games. And that wasn't, even though that was pretty big news. As we said, this was just formalizing it. It was known for a while that it was coming. The other one that was a bit more of a surprise this week in game industry consolidation news is, according to various sources, I've got 9 to 5 Max report on it, EA is actively seeking a potential buyer or merger, and they apparently are in talks with Apple as for some sort of potential acquisition. Apple, of course, being Apple, but making increasing plays in the gaming space, including their Apple Arcade service for Macs and iPhones and iPads that started back in 2019. The apparently, EA has made outreach to a number of different folks, including Amazon and Disney as potential acquisition targets. EA is looking for a company that they could do a merger with rather than be acquired by as their preference. Though, as this article points out, it's a little hard to think about how that would work with the companies that they're in talks with, all of whom are quite a bit bigger than EA is. Not that EA is a small company; they're a huge company, but Apple is the biggest company in the world. So
yeah, exactly.
It doesn't. I believe I'm being told it doesn't get any bigger than that if you're the biggest company in the world. So
yeah, it's funny you say that because I believe the first time I heard talks of this was earlier in the week, and it was NBC Universal was in talks, and I know that's since been kind of pushed to the wayside in terms of this later news. So it is interesting to hear a bunch of different kind of big names there in the talks of that, and I wonder exactly how that would play out with a company like EA. But it's funny you note that because it is companies that I wouldn't necessarily think would be in this big gaming acquisition frenzy like we've been talking about over the past.
Yeah, and I mean that is the frenzy, right? Because you've got these two pieces of news this week. We've got the Sony Bungie acquisition that happened for, I think it was $3.6 billion. We've got the Microsoft Activision Blizzard one that we previously mentioned, which is still in the works, and I think would be valued around $70 billion. The combined entity. So it's a time when a lot of that is going on, and I think what you're seeing in a lot of these pairings, there are trends, right? So you certainly have the trend of, like, Microsoft acquiring Activision Blizzard, or the trend of Sony acquiring Bungie, where it is a larger but established game industry player acquiring another player. And then you've got the trend of folks who you don't necessarily think of as game industry players, like Disney, potential, or an Apple, even though Apple really is a game industry player, acquiring another, an established publisher. And ultimately, I think it's about the same thing in both cases. Games are the biggest entertainment industry in the world at this point. Certainly in terms of profitability. And so I think in all of these cases, these are what we would call, what folks at business school would call diversification plays for all the companies involved. And I think, if you're, that Zynga Take-Two merger, you've now got, one company that was primarily a mobile social company. You've got one company that was more of a traditional, franchise based, PC console gaming company. Those are very different revenue models, right? You've got a, a one-time purchase or a one-time purchase with content packs type model, versus a mobile social free-to-play model. And, a company that can combine those into one, now has a much more diverse set of ways to get revenue from people. And I think it's the same thing, when you talk about, why would Apple want to acquire EA? It's the same thing. Apple in the gaming industry, runs an app store. And so that's, as a storefront provider, they've got their 30% cut of everything that goes through. And they, also are effectively a publisher with their Apple Arcade initiative. And that's a subscription-based revenue model for them. And, now you've got a traditional gaming company that is primarily known as a purveyor of one-time purchase games or content, pack add-on type games, and increasingly loot boxes. But unfortunately,
that's how it goes. But
the less said about that, the better. And so again, I think it diversifies, and it lets companies who are either traditional entertainment companies or other kinds of companies have a little bit more, diversity. Again, I think for someone like Disney, that's what it's about, right? It's like, yeah, we've got film, we've got television, we're massive in those spaces, but television revenues, are not what they once were. Subscription, services don't have the sterling reputation that they once did. Theater, movie theater revenues were majorly disrupted by the pandemic and have been disrupted by streaming. And there's a sense that all of those are declining or fading business models, but games are not, man. Games continue to be where it's at.
And I think that's really interesting, especially in the Disney's perspective, when you talk about that move to home entertainment. And we could, every company I'm sure is seeing those trends in other areas. But I think that specifically with how Disney's been going into gaming in the past, they've had that EA exclusive deal in the past on their Star Wars properties, which obviously kind of wasn't the most successful deal there. They actually ended up getting Disney involved in a lot of lawsuits and litigation over youth gambling, which was not something I'm sure Disney wanted to be involved with whatsoever.
Seems not brand aligned for Disney.
Doesn't seem like Mickey Mouse would approve of that one, but I think that it's something that I guess they're smart enough to realize they can go and realize what EA has to offer to the table here, despite, what happened in the past between these two companies. I do think there is a lot of profitability and a lot of interesting things that could be done here with this merger. So I do understand where they're coming from here, but I do think it is interesting specifically for the talks with Disney because of their relationship in the past. But specifically with gaming, I think that gives them an opportunity to not just, dump their Star Wars or Marvel or their IP into gaming, but also branch out in terms of what they're offering as a brand themselves in their parks, in their, just all on a large scale media front. Because I think they're aware of the declines in certain industries. They're aware of the growth of this home entertainment and gaming in general, interactive entertainment becoming so big. And I think they want to be in on the ground floor or wherever the next stage of entertainment's going. And I think Disney will make sure they are.
And as you say, for Disney, if indeed Disney is in talks here, it totally aligns with their franchise strategy. As you say, they want to completely, vertically integrate and control the entirety of a franchise, whether that's the the movie, the streaming, the theme park attraction, and increasingly games. And I think that a lot of those other areas, the conventionalism is there on the decline, but the games are ascendant, and that's kind of cool. So I don't think it's the last. I don't think these two are the last two of these we're going to hear about in the next 12 months by a long shot. And it will, it reminds me a little bit, just to kind of close out this thread. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of, if you've ever followed, again, it helps to be an old guy like me, the story of how we went from, having like one phone company to having all the baby bells and all the broken up phone companies. And now we're back to having like 3 phone companies. Again, it'll be interesting to see the separations and the combinations, how they play out.
Exactly. And I think, just like you said there, that consolidation process, you can kind of see it all kind of fluctuating and then going back to that. And we'll see how that goes. And just on the front of, all mediums in general, not just gaming, I'd like to bring it back to, kind of getting into our next story we'll get to in a second. But with that integration of IPs across multiple mediums, I think is such a really important point for Disney and for other companies right now. I think, especially with something like Star Wars, which is the easiest example, I think, because it's such a monolithic brand. I mean, you have Obi-Wan, the series coming out, I believe today, this week. So I'm thinking, you can have some sort of, maybe cross, kind of brand there with the Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order game, where you kind of have that in the same era. We have the character from that game visiting the Disney parks. They're getting merchandise. They're, so maybe, I'm not trying to, get these pre-spoilers. I haven't seen Obi-Wan yet myself at all. So I'm thinking maybe we get some integration with the games. There's been some talks of that. We talked about that on the report a few weeks back, how Ewan McGregor even hinted at maybe leaving some of that story to integration with the video games and novels in general. So
for better or for worse, popular entertainment is franchises. You know what I mean? And I think that that's another thing we're going to see more of.
Yeah. I don't have an article in front of me, but I believe Guillermo del Toro said this earlier this week, that there were 2 words in the past few years. It was content and pipeline, that are just antithetical to the idea of true story. But I understand that that's kind of the main words that, promote a franchise now, and a story is, how can we create this into a content pipeline of new series or new movies, or this is a trilogy, how do we format that? And again, when you have a brand like Star Wars, I do think that is a brand where you can do that. I don't think it is in a negative connotation or anything like that. I do think that when you have a brand so flexible and so open to all these different types of stories, I do think that is a good idea on their part to branch out. But
yeah, and I do think, I mean, far be it from me to to disagree with Guillermo del Toro, who I have a lot of respect for. But I mean, I think he is right in that, if you depending on how you manage it, I think that there are ways to manage some of these mega franchises that actually allow for interesting stuff to go on creatively, right? And again, you see examples of that in the MCU, right? I think that if I thought that Moon Knight was a pretty out there series, and I think it was polarizing. I think some people liked it and some people didn't, but there was absolutely a creative voice to that, especially if you listen to what the creator had to say about it, right? And I thought that of WandaVision. I thought that of Loki to an extent. Some of the MCU movies, I think, incorporate a bit of that as well, and then some of them don't. And I think some of them are very much following a formula in terms of where they go thematically and creatively and plot wise, and you can do it more or less successfully, right? I mean, I ask Warner Brothers how they think things are going on the Wizarding World franchise, for example. But we know which of course, and of course, we're all eagerly anticipating a game release later this year there too. I think we're still saying later this year about that.
Yeah, one. I think Hogwarts is still this year as of now.
Yeah. Later this year than originally anticipated this year.
Yeah,
and
I think a lot of those
2022.
Yeah, a lot of those PlayStation, and not just PlayStation, but Xbox as well. A lot of the end of the year is still a bit up in the air, and we'll talk about that a little later in the show as well. But a lot of the end of the year is still just kind of, we're waiting for these summer shows to really solidify some of these release dates. But I do think Hogwarts Legacy, we just got a mini trailer this week. Wasn't really an update, but just kind of going over the DualSense features, the haptics, the triggers, kind of showing that PlayStation integration. So they are on there with the marketing track. I do believe it is on track to release this year, but again, we'll have to wait and see the confirmation there. But speaking of PlayStation, kind of getting into our next story here as well, just on that same front of that kind of all media integration here, we have more talks about PlayStation TV shows. So we've already covered in past weeks about Twisted Metal getting a TV show, a franchise from a while back. We're getting a Last of Us TV show, which is going to be the biggest HBO production yet, and basically in HBO history. We're going to get now a Horizon TV show, probably going on Netflix, a God of War series on Amazon, as well as a Gran Turismo show and or movie. I believe it's a Gran Turismo movie I've heard as well. So maybe there's some mixed reports on whether that's a show or a movie, but I've heard both on that one. But PlayStation is going all in. I mean, that's like about 6 or 7, I want to say, IPs going straight to a full-on, full-fledged series, not even including other video game projects that are in the works right now. I mean, you have things like Fallout, things like the Halo show we just talked about briefly earlier airing now. So it's kind of crazy to see how much of, the TV industry is realizing that these large, giant video game IPs are going to have this impact. I'm just hoping, unlike maybe some other video game shows that maybe switch things up, I'm hoping that these are something that fans of the franchises are really going to enjoy. But I have interesting thoughts on this. I have high hopes, though. I'm not too pessimistic when it comes to adaptations, like some people can be. But I think it's very interesting.
Well, that's the question. I feel like that's the question, particularly with video game adaptations to, where they take video game IP to another medium. Are you going to get something that's interesting, or are you going to get something that is ugly Sonic, right? And
exactly,
and not just in the aesthetics. I mean, I think in general, how interesting, how faithful, how much in the if not in every detail, how much in the spirit it is. And again, the history of video game adaptations is not super great with this kind of stuff. I'm old enough to remember the Super Mario Brothers movie with Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo, and I believe Dennis Hopper as King Cooper. And that I think that is generally not regarded as a great or particularly faithful adaptation. But I mean, it sounds like your hopes are so first of all, are you a huge fan of any of those IPs, Anthony?
I wouldn't say. Here's the thing. I'm definitely a PlayStation fan. I've played almost all these games. I haven't played all the way through the Horizon series, so I can't say that. I'm a huge fan. Twisted Metal is something I haven't played in a long time, so
I remember how playing Twisted Metal games on the PS1, dude. So
and I played it at my grandparents' house on a PS1. That was my older brother's, and that was how I got introduced to PlayStation. So that was one of the first games I had played, and I think it's gonna be interesting to see a narrative through that series. I know there's some big names coming to that as well. I'm losing track of them off the top of my head, but the God of War series as well is something I'm pretty interested in. I really enjoyed God of War in 2018. We're going to talk about it a little later, but I think we're hoping still that God of War sequel Ragnarok this year is still coming in 2022. We have some info on that a bit later on, but I think that's going to be really interesting as well. I think if you get a good duo working as Kratos and his son there, I think that could be awesome if that's the way they're going with it of the new games.
Yeah, there's no reason that any of those have to. I don't want to be misinterpreted. There's no reason any of those have to be train wrecks. They all could be awesome. They're all very well told, and certain of them. I think God of War is a good example. I certainly think The Last of Us is a fantastic example. Are very cinematic. They're very cinematic games and IPs to begin with.
Yeah.
And so I mean that's a Naughty Dog game for you, right? And so we just had an Uncharted
movie. Yeah, exactly. So, which I still haven't seen. I really should. I
know. I keep thinking I'm going to watch it on a plane in my travels at some point. Yeah. And I never remember to. I mean, this is it ties into some of the stuff with the mergers as well. It's we live in a franchise world. So going back maybe 15 years ago, I'll tell you a funny story. I was in a classroom, and we were talking about the impact of games and comics on popular culture. So, and it was probably I think it was a middle school classroom, and at some point we asked the kids, who is a fan of comic book characters? And nobody raised their hands. And then we said, who's a fan of Iron Man? And half the class raised their hands, because I think the middle school kids at that time don't primarily associate Iron Man with comic books. They associate him with the MCU.
Exactly.
And I think that we live in a world where big entertainment and media companies, they're companies. It is a business, and I don't mean to begrudge that because that's I'm in general a pro business guy, but they're big companies and they're in business and they're making big bets with lots of money, and they would prefer that those bets aren't risky. And the best way to do that is with established IP, and I think that we're starting to mine the depths, particularly in the MCU as an example of established IP there, right? Because we're definitely getting into the JV of characters and storylines, and I'm sure there are comics fans who would excoriate me for that remark, but I think it's true, and I think there are I think that it surprised me to a big extent that Star Wars as a franchise hasn't mined more of the video game stuff, because there's great stuff in the video games, the Jedi Knight series, the Old Republic series. And there have been talks of it, of course, and I don't know what exactly the official or unofficial current status, but someone at some point was supposed to be working on an Old Republic trilogy.
Yeah, I heard the same reports. I'm not sure what's going on with that, but the series Acolyte is coming, which I believe is supposed to talk about the Sith, or we're gonna get some of that in the Disney Plus series, hopefully. But I heard about the trilogy as well.
So I think that as we we have really started to maybe mine the depths and run down the proven reserves of comic book IP. I think video game IP is the next thing. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this over the next 10 or 15 years.
Absolutely. And I think it's crazy to see, especially after that first few announcements of things like Twisted Metal, The Last of Us, we've heard of for a bit now. And then we got, Fallout TV series, I hadn't mentioned this before, a Mass Effect TV series. It's just a lot of huge franchises where I'm thinking, how could, something like Fallout or Mass Effect, it's already has so much lore, so much even if it's not a, single narrative, single player based game like these Sony cinematic games, you still have a lot of narrative to go off of there. You have a lot of material to work with, where I don't doubt they can make an incredible story even off an open world type franchise. But I think just with all of these huge franchises being hit right off the get-go, I'm worried that I'm not sure all of these are going to be able to flourish. I'm wondering, just because of the idea of them being like 8 or 9 just huge video game series, if I'm curious to see which of these will thrive. I really think, like you said before, the Last of Us series is one that I've talked about a lot, because I think HBO is putting all of their money where their mouth is with that. I think that it's they put more money there than even the last season of Game of Thrones. I'm pretty.
That is an incredible fact.
Yeah, I'm pretty optimistic with how much they're invested into that. So I'd be shocked if that was the one that was,
Oh, I don't think any of these are going to hurt from production value. Though I say that, but then I'm thinking, I felt that the current Halo series that's airing suffers a bit from production value issues, because I don't think they're doing Game of Thrones budgets per episode, but they're not. None of them are going to be starved for resources. But while I appreciate your optimism, and listen, I'd like there to be more good stuff in the world, I don't think you can necessarily expect it, and I don't think the companies behind it do. For these companies, this is a portfolio strategy. And it's a smart strategy. Not everything is going to be successful, whether it's TV series based on video game IP, whether it's not every individual movie in the MCU is going to be, either interesting, creatively, financially successful to the extent they would like, or both. And you just it's all about bets, man. You make a lot of bets, and some of them work out and some of them, don't. And if you only have one bet up and it doesn't work out, that's not great. And if you only have 2 bets up and only one of them works out, that's not super great either. But if you have 10 bets up and 8 of them don't work out, and one of them works out okay, and another one of them works out great, that can be enough to sort of offset your losses on the 8 that didn't work out, and you're pretty happy about that.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of, for a little transition here, speaking of Sony making bets here, it kind of leads us into our next story with them. Not to get off that conversation too much, but this in the same vein here, I'm going to pull this story up real quick. Sony is expecting to make around $300 million from PC releases in the coming years, what they're saying. And in saying this, they're also saying that they are investing in more than 10 live service projects, which is something we've heard from them in the past. But they are basically betting on releasing a lot more games multi-platform, meaning probably PS5 and PC as well. I'm not sure about any other platforms on that. I think that's probably just meaning PC. And releasing a lot more, they said up to 10 live service projects that are still unannounced as of now, but are currently in development. So Sony is going all in with their TV strategy, with their game strategy, not just on PlayStation, but getting these PC ports more and more out there. Like they've already got Horizon, God of War, Days Gone. I believe Uncharted, that collection is coming to PC as well, or that was maybe just a leak that's happening soon. But yeah, we have them kind of committing to this multifaceted approach and really placing bets in a lot of different places here. We have, I just think it's very interesting that they have all of this live service approach, given their kind of bread and butter has always been these single player narrative games that have done so well and been so successful. I mean, we're going to get Spider-Man 2. I'm sure we're going to get God of War Ragnarok, hopefully later this year. We're going to get a lot more from those series, all those big series. I'm positive, but I think that we're going to see a pretty different PlayStation come 2024, 2025, once all of this starts really getting announced and underway. I think we're going to see a lot of different moves from them. We're going to see them. All these TV shows are probably going to be in action. We're going to see a lot of cross-platform multiplayer, maybe PC type games from them. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how that transition takes place. But that's kind of all I have for that headline right there, because I think it's very interesting that their PC games are already performing really well for them. So that's inspiring them to just go further into this approach, which I really think is interesting.
I made several "I'm old enough to remember" type comments on this one, and so I'll make another, which is I'm old enough to remember when PlayStation exclusive meant PlayStation exclusive, right?
Yeah.
And I joke because that wasn't all that. You don't actually have to be that old to remember that, but it makes all the sense in the world. You know, the realities of modern game development are, you know, your game consoles are PCs, and you're making stuff for them, especially if, you know, not necessarily if you're Sony as a first party developer, or if you're Naughty Dog or somebody, but if you're certainly an indie developer and you're using an engine like Unity or Unreal, then the incremental work to make your game work on a different platform, you know, between, you know, PC, PlayStation, and Xbox, just isn't, you know, that's it. Typically the revenue you can get justifies that additional work. And so why wouldn't you do that? And I think Sony understands that. I also think this was a reaction to conditions in the pandemic, right? You know, we had a chip shortage. We're still dealing to an extent with a chip shortage. And if the only people that can experience your game are people who won the lottery and were able to get a PS5 with, you know, that was one of made with your allocation,
or a
of
crazy
chips.
person like me who was in September pre-ordering it for like 8 hours straight, clicking every button. Someone like that when they first announced it. When they first announced it, then in 2020, just spamming those Best Buy inboxes. Someone like me. Yeah, it's almost impossible. I'm lucky that I even was able to do it that way. But
the reality is, if you, when you're under those supply constraints, you can't get your game into the hands of as many people, because there are only so many consoles out there. Aren't enough consoles out there to even meet the demand for the consoles and the demand of those console exclusive titles that people want to play. So I think it's a smart move, and it's another thing I expect to see more of, and it's a good segue into our next story.
And I'm pulling it up right here.
So you know, the other trend that comes into play when you talk about hardware scarcity is cloud gaming. And, you know, news came out this week, this from GameDeveloper.com, which was, by the way, can I just say, I don't know that I've gotten to say this on an endless report. I am so glad that the what is now the primary internet news source for the industry that I work in has a name that I'm not embarrassed to say on a live stream. Microsoft has had in the works for a while, since I believe 2020, a project codenamed Keystone, which is to do a dedicated game streaming device. So unlike a PC or an Xbox Series console that can play games, but also can be the client to stream games from Xbox's cloud gaming service. They want to do hardware that's just about being able to stream where everything is done in the cloud and no local capacity to do games. So anyway, they've had that in the works for a while. And it was announced this week that they're actually pivoting away from their current hardware effort on that, sort of treating it like a experiment, if you will, where they learn some stuff. But it appears that they're throwing out a bunch of what they did and are going to be starting over to some extent on what they hope will become the commercial version of effectively an Xbox branded cloud gaming streaming stick.
Which sounds awesome. I mean, I think back to something like the PlayStation TV, which wasn't very popular. It kind of went along the wayside, but that was kind of a companion to the Vita, and then maybe streaming from your PS4, and that didn't really find its home. But I think if you could have something like that with Xbox's game cloud services and Game Pass, and have that working really fluidly, maybe have a hardwired connection to that kind of box, have that hooked up to your TV, and be able to stream games without buying a console. I mean, for a lot of people, that'd be really interesting. Again, personally myself, I'm more inclined to just work with a solid, machine that I have in front of me. But I do like the idea of game streaming. I do think that it's going to open up, games for a lot of people that wouldn't be able to play them in the first place. So I'm curious to see how their new box would work that out.
Have you had any hands-on experience with a cloud gaming service, Anthony?
Briefly, actually. I did subscribe to Game Pass mobile. I tried playing it both on an Android actually and on an iPhone. I believe the Android version was in like a beta testing version at the time. So it wasn't super smooth. I tried playing Halo on that at the time. I had a little lag there, but it was something to be able to play anything on my phone attached to a controller like that in the first place. But
I am genuinely surprised, again, especially during the pandemic when you had hardware shortages, and a lot of these services were emerging. I'm genuinely, or at least this round of these services, because again, the people have been trying to do this for over a decade now. I am genuinely surprised that none of these cloud gaming services got more traction than they did. Because I actually have spent a decent amount of time looking into these, for various business reasons. And so I've tried them all. I've tried the commercial services. I've tried folks that let you, roll your own. I've tried hosted gaming PC in a cloud that you can just, that actually exposes the Windows desktop, and you can install whatever, put Steam on there and install anything from your library. And you know what? The technology is pretty good. I'm on a crappy Chromebook, playing, what was it? I mean, it was something Control. It was Control.
Oh, wow. Control. And that's a really demanding game. And I know it's the big streaming game right now for some reason. I think AT&T just said they're giving Control as a free streaming game to all AT&T subscribers. So it's been a big deal on streaming. I think it's a very hard game to run.
I was playing Control on Google Stadia in the Chrome browser on a Chromebook. And, it's certainly not the same as playing it on your own beefy gaming PC, but it was impressively acceptable, right?
Yeah. Wow.
And is that technology there to let folks do highly competitive multiplayer games? Certainly not at this stage, right? And there just may be inherent technological hurdles that are hard, like latency, that are hard to overcome there. But I am genuinely surprised that hasn't done more and better than it has, and somewhat baffled as to why. But as we see with the story from Microsoft, folks are continuing to bet on it. I mean, this is an interesting one. Well, again, my goal, Anthony, on today's stream is to make an old guy comment about every single story, if I can do it. So my old guy comment on this story is there are certain trends in the history of computing or in the industry where something is like, on a trend in one particular direction. It's like, computer processors get more powerful.
Mhm.
Then there are other areas where I find it's very cyclical, and we just kind of, go back and forth between one extreme and the other,
Mhm.
and in a bunch of different sub areas. And I think gaming is going to continue for at least a while yet to be one of them. We keep oscillating between all the power is on the local device and all the power is in the cloud,
Mhm.
and you have effectively a thin client.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's ever going to be a day where it's like, okay, it's over, it's been decided, and one of these two won. I think, because as long as there has been internet that pretty much everybody can have,
Mhm.
this in different industry segments, it's just been bouncing back and forth between these two poles, and I don't know, I expect that to continue.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny you say that. It's always at like one extreme of whether we're all utilizing one or the other. I feel like back even around the launch of the Xbox One, when they talked so much about how their cloud platform was going to be able to support these huge games that were kind of on the level of games that we're really not even seeing today on this next generation with the Series and the PS5. But I remember that Crackdown 3 demo was a really big deal for the Xbox Cloud, just servers and the Microsoft Azure at the time. And I remember that basically wasn't able to really come to fruition the way they wanted to. But I think if that cloud technology can be used in a way that is, again, it's probably not going to be consistent. Like you said, I think it'll keep fluctuating. But I think when we get certain use case scenarios where people are really able to utilize that technology well, I think there still is a ton of potential. And like you said, I don't think there's a future where cloud streaming is so good that you might as well just stream all the time. I think maybe our hardware will just get that good that maybe I still want to just have a local machine that's so much that more powerful anyway, just because that's the way things are going. But I think I'll always kind of be that guy anyway. I always kind of want to have my system in front of me. I think that's something that I just like the idea of not having to rely on the network being perfect. But at the same time, I do think that if I could have, flawless streaming at one day where I'm not worrying a single bit about latency or whatsoever, then I may think differently. I mean, I said similar things about digital gaming where I was like, I love my disc, I love getting the box and having my collection on the shelf. And now it's just so easy to download games where I'm thinking maybe I'll just like one day I'll get a nice like display box to represent it, but I don't even want to buy games. I just like downloading because it's so simple for me. But then I worry, the licensing and everything else, but convenience does play a factor for sure.
Yeah. So I think our next item on the docket is we had in the gamer PC hardware news, we had a big announcement from AMD this week, which is they announced kind of the big details on what's going to become the fourth generation of their Zen architecture for their chips and the Ryzen 7000 series of processors. So there's a lot of hardware detail there about the capabilities of those processors. They're going to like the most recent the 12,000 series of Intel processors. They will have support for DDR5 and PCIe Gen 5. But kind of embedded in the announcement was an interesting little piece of gaming news that AMD highlighted and folks picked up on and were intrigued by, which is they showed a demo of the game of a pre-production Ryzen, a 16-core Ryzen 7000 series CPU at Computex, and it was playing Ghostwire Tokyo, which ran smoothly. And they showed that for at least brief periods of time during that play session, the processor boosted to 5.5 gigahertz. Which is interesting, and I think is at or above the territory of the best 12th gen Intel, like a Intel 12900KS, which I think is the beefiest Intel chip. And obviously, core clocks aren't everything, as in fact AMD showed with their most recent Ryzen 5000 series release, which was the X3D chip that uses cache to make some pretty high frame rates happen in games, because that's the nature of how games work, and can take advantage of that. But that's pretty intriguing. Other interesting news embedded there was that and this was I think previously announced, but that these Ryzen 7000 series chips will use a new socket format, which is the AM5 socket, which replaces the AM4 socket that has been used for the prior generations of Ryzen desktop processors. And but what's interesting is that the so that'll mean all new motherboards. I mean, you can't just drop in a new suit, which is actually, I think, a thing. I was watching a story on I think Hardware Unboxed on YouTube earlier this week, and they made a pretty persuasive argument, both like philosophically and with data, that really has the fact that AMD supports the same socket for like 4 different generations of chips, as opposed to Intel, who kind of only does it for 2, has been a competitive advantage for AMD. So we'll see if that continues with AM5. But the nice thing about it that they also said was that any cooler that works with AM4 will also work with AM5. So if you are a hardware geek and want to build your own PC and bring your cooler forward, that's the thing you can do. So I'm excited about this one, personally, Anthony, because like we were talking about before the stream, my goal is actually to make it into either this first generation of these Ryzen 7000 chips, or the next, the 13th gen Intel chips that I think will also come out next year, before I do any kind of massive upgrade of my personal gaming rig.
Yeah, and I think that's what's very interesting about it to me, is that, like we said, the AM5 socket is compatible with AM4 coolers. So that's one thing you don't have to replace. But again, depending on your setup, you may have to, get a whole new motherboard, a new cooling solution, depending. Like I know you talked about earlier, having a water cooling solution that's probably not going to be compatible with this upgrade. So there might have to be a bit of a workaround there. But I think that's interesting that, unfortunately, when we get some of these newer processors that aren't compatible with other older boards and things like that, I think it's one of those things where you decide, am I going to wait, till next year to upgrade? And I feel like it's always tough to be on the right side of that. But I think you have the right move here with going with that new upgrade. I think that's in your case.
Yeah, I like to hold on to stuff for a long time. And I mean, again, it's a great time to be a PC gamer on the hardware side. I only really, one of the ways I kept myself busy during the early phases of the pandemic was becoming more and more of a geek about PC hardware. And it was a lousy time to be doing that because you couldn't get any, unfortunately. But now with 12th gen Intel, which is really, really solid. We've got another generation of GPUs coming on the market from both AMD and Intel, and AMD, NVIDIA, and Intel, who's getting into the consumer standalone GPU market, expected later this year, and another generation from both AMD and Intel of processors. And it looks like you might actually be able to buy this stuff.
Yeah, maybe.
Right. There's competition. There's stuff out there. Fingers crossed there will be inventory. So it's a pretty cool time to be a PC gamer.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering when we'll see the next generation of graphics cards, like the 4000 series or from NVIDIA. But I'm curious to see when that'll happen. But I'm pretty excited to see what's next for PC hardware, because it's a pretty exciting time. Absolutely.
That will come out immediately after I finally buy a 3000 series.
Exactly. After you put that last, you screw in that last
literally that last screw on the PCIe slot, and then I'll get a news notification that the 4000 series is dropped.
Exactly. And I think, funny enough, kind of transitioning back to PlayStation a little bit, they have said, of course, with that PC strategy, I think in the meantime, while console hardware is just so hard to get in a similar vein, I think they're smart to focus on having that cross-platform approach. And I think that hopefully consoles are going to be beefed up even more in the next year or two once this chip shortage starts working itself out. I mean, I'm not sure exactly when the case is there. I've heard some conflicting reports over the last few weeks from different sources about it going as far as into 2024, 25, or ending sooner rather than later. But I've heard both cases. So I'm kind of crossing my fingers there with the chip shortage, but that's something else to worry about. But I do know that Sony has said that they're trying to ramp up PlayStation 5 production to heights never reached before, even with other previous generations, once that issue becomes resolved. So I think we're going to see a lot more consoles in general, especially the PlayStation side. I'm not as much sure about Xbox as well as the PlayStation side once they really dive into PC. I mean, I'm definitely a fan of Xboxes and their IPs. Unfortunately, it's been a tough year with delays and things for them. We've talked about earlier on the show, but I think when you have PlayStation jumping into a similar vein, not necessarily becoming a all PC kind of approach like Xbox has in the past, but I do think that you'll see more and more PC gamers be open to investing in a machine that maybe wouldn't have been open to investing in a PC before.
I'm a fan of it. I become more and more of a fan of it, especially because you can control the quality of what you put in, you can make incremental upgrades and still carry lots of stuff in your system forward, and the thing is, for gaming performance, processors are remarkably long-lived. Processors last a long time as hardware. And if you've got a 4-core Intel, 6000 series processor still in 2022 for gaming, you pair that with a modern graphics card, that's fine. That's going to, that will change as cards only support the latest standards, or PCs only support the latest standards like DDR5 or PCIe Gen 5 or what have you, or emerging technologies like direct storage, which has still yet to make its way into a actual PC game you could buy, but it will be interesting when it does. So that'll change, but for now that's pretty good. It's another way to get around hardware shortages, and with more and more or I should say less and less things becoming exclusive to a particular console, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of transitioning to our next story, going back to PlayStation here, we have some news about some of their upcoming games as well as some of their upcoming showcases. So kind of wrapping up there, again, related to PC, I am curious to see how this generation progresses more so than any other, just because, again, obviously I'm a console gamer as well. I have a PS5. I'm excited to see all the games coming out of it. But I think that as the generation goes on and as developers get more accustomed to this hardware and we see bigger and better games, we also see an evolution in the PC market as well. And I think we also see PC games in general have higher and higher heights that they can achieve. And I think that especially with the idea of that having a built-in PCIe 4.0 SSD that every game on PS5 requires to run on, I think that's kind of setting a standard for, certain load speeds and things like that to become standards on PC later on. I think obviously, not saying you have to have one of those SSDs to run most PC games right now, but I think in the future, I think a lot of games will be built in mind with fast storage in mind, with other things like that going forward, and it's kind of having that baseline of graphics power, processing power, kind of shift a bit. But oh, I'm sorry. Were you gonna say something on that?
Oh no, I was gonna make my old guy comment on this story.
Yeah, please do.
Are you prepared for the old guy comment?
Absolutely.
So again, my old guy comment on this one is I've been using computers for a long time. My first family PC when I was a kid, was technically my first family PC when I was a kid was made by Atari in the 80s, and my first real PC was a 286 12 megahertz PC with a then quite impressive 40 megabyte hard drive in it. 40 megabytes, Anthony.
For the time, I'm sure it was pretty impressive. I mean, I remember
it was pretty impressive
having my 5 megabyte memory cards and stuff like that.
Yeah. So in my lifetime as a geeky tech guy and PC user, the single biggest advancement and quality of life improvement using a PC or a console, on a regular basis that I experienced was the switch to solid state storage instead of hard drives, right? And you mentioned getting games on disk, and obviously I know that when you get a game on a disk on a modern console, it caches to the local storage, and that's that. But I mean, when you go back to the PlayStation, 1 or 2 or original Xbox or Xbox 360 days, even, and the game ran off of the CD, right? And it's like, oh, I remember playing Skyrim on an Xbox 360, and it's like, I went into an interior environment, and that's a minute load time.
Yeah, easily a minute. Yeah.
Because CDs and DVDs are slow. And I think that now that you've got, thing, like I was watching a hardware review the other day, and there was a laptop review, and they're like, we don't know how they do it, but they're getting over 10,000 megabytes or megabits. Now I'm confusing my units of measurement per second sustained read and write speeds on these, NVMe drives. And that's really stinking fast.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we're going to see more and more of that, and more games that take advantage of it. And again, it's going to be, I don't think we're that, and in some ways with some of the little hacks and user experience tricks that people do, we're already game devs do, we're already there. But the zone where you really can walk around the highly detailed, massively open worlds and feel like there's no load times whatsoever is going to be, I think that's going to be pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I think that, especially kind of wrapping this idea up here, I think that I've always had conversations like this throughout my whole life with friends about, what are graphics going to look like in 10 years? What are this going to look like? But I think just the logistics of the processing power, I think, is what's more exciting than the graphical, fidelity. I think when you have the idea of reducing those loading times, having, crazy, draw distances, things like that, I think are really what can change the feel of a game. And I think when you have this processing power coming, it's just exciting. But kind of, closing things up here, I want to talk a bit more about PlayStation before we head out here. God of War Ragnarok, a game we've talked about a few times during the show, hopefully is coming this year. We have some more news that implies it probably is coming later this year. So we've gotten reports that God of War Ragnarok has been rated by the Korean ratings board. So personally, I'm not exactly sure when their timeline, how their timelines work and how prior to a game's release in Korea they would rate something. But having, I believe it's a mature rating, having a rating at all is very indicative that this game is very close to either going gold or being launched this fall, I believe. So I think that's very exciting news there for PlayStation, that they're still going to have one of these bigger games at the end of 2022. Again, we've covered Microsoft last week and weeks prior on the show about how they unfortunately have had a delay to their major releases for this fall. So we're actually getting a Xbox showcase on June 12th. We have talked about that prior as well. But now we are also getting PlayStation State of Play, which I will pull that up as well in a moment. So this is actually coming next Thursday, believe it or not. So PlayStation, like always, loves to kind of announce things right at right before they kind of get into things. So they kind of wait, see what everybody else is doing, and then drop the all right, it's coming in 5 days, 6 days, whatever. So we're gonna see what exactly PlayStation shows on Thursday. I'm pretty excited, but I'm not sure we should be expecting, maybe not God of War, maybe not our Spider-Man 2s or anything like that. I believe this is going to be third-party based and PlayStation VR based, which is very interesting. I'm curious to see PlayStation VR 2. That's still on track to come out this fall. They've been kind of, quiet about it, kind of kept everything under wraps with PSVR 2, but they've been slowly, incrementally showing the controllers, showing, hints at the Ryzen game, which is launching on PSVR 2, which I'm curious to see how that's going to work out. But I believe we're going to get a huge showcase for PlayStation VR 2 games as well as third party on next Thursday. So I'm curious to see how that will go. I mean, that's the night before our next endless reports over here next Friday. I'm sure we'll be able to talk about those games that were announced.
There'll be plenty to talk about.
I'm sure there'll be plenty to talk about next Friday about those game announcements as well. And then, of course, we'll be going back into Xbox and Summer Game Fest in the week after, or maybe a week and a half after. We'll see there. I think it's about 10 days after this PlayStation showcase now. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I mean, this is the time of year where at those you start to hear about, this is the thing that maybe sort of could possibly, if everything falls into place, be released by the end of this year, right? Because now is when everyone is, in the game industry. We've talked about it on prior reports where everyone in the game industry is hoping to get their, holiday release shipped when they think they're going to get it shipped, and most of them do by hook or by crook, even if the game is not in fact ready to be released at that time.
Or it's like things like or the next Call of Duty, when you have all of the studios from the entire company working to make sure that one game gets out. And I think that's a game that it was announced for October. That's something we really have time to cover this week, but that's announced October 28th, I believe. So we're gonna get another Call of Duty this year as well. We're probably gonna get another big game for Xbox. We'll see. I believe they're gonna have something up their sleeve this summer to release in the fall, whether that is a collection of older games, whether that is a surprise third party, maybe Game Pass exclusive. We'll see what they do there, but I'm sure they have something up their sleeve as well. And I'm really excited to see what everybody's working on this summer. I mean, obviously the big three of PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo on the console front, but as well as PC games in general. I know we heard about the Callisto Protocol recently, which is a spiritual successor to Dead Space, which is supposed to come out, I believe in January 2023. So I think we'll see a bit of that this summer as well. That was very interesting as well. But yeah, I mean, I could talk all day for another hour about games I'm anticipating, but I think we're trying to wrap up our show
what's your
here.
number one game you're anticipating before the end of this year? That's supposed to come out before the end of this year.
It was Starfield previously, I would say. I was very excited for that game coming from Bethesda Game Studios. Again, obviously, I'm a big fan of Skyrim and the Elder Scrolls series, and Fallout as well. So that's something I was very excited for. But now that that's up in the air, I'm actually, believe it or not, I'm not a huge Harry Potter fan myself. I haven't read the books. I have seen most of the movies. I do love Harry Potter. I'm not the biggest Harry Potter fan, but Hogwarts Legacy does look really, really intriguing. It looks really fun. So that's something I want to
That's my number one.
I haven't said that on past Endless Reports, so I want to throw that in because I'm sure on past Endless Reports I've said a few different ones. But Hogwarts Legacy looks really, really exciting.
That's my number one. I am a Harry Potter fan, and now I've just started reading the first Harry Potter book with my 6-year-old, and nice. She's really into it. So I don't know that the game will necessarily be appropriate to play together, but at least it's gotten me rekindled and back into Harry Potter.
Absolutely.
So that is definitely my number one right now.
I'm curious to see how they handle the action and maybe the horror elements or the more sinister elements of the magic in Harry Potter. But I think it's definitely something to be excited for.
My experience reading it with my 6-year-old, and it's not what I expected, is how funny it is. She's laughing every couple of pages at something that the characters do, or elements of the writing, or I had forgotten a little because the movies make it a little darker, particularly the latter ones, and then the books do get darker later in the series. But I'm curious if they get any of that, the humor and the lightheartedness that I think the books at their best moments have.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think that kind of wraps it up for our Endless Report this week. I mean, is there anything else you're excited for the next coming weeks that you'd like to touch on before we head out today?
Well, I think I guess I'll do one plug, which is I think over the next couple of weeks, we probably will have some news to share, Anthony, about our summer programs that will be going on in Endless Studios. And I think in addition to our gaming news here on the Endless Report, we'll be doing more streams related to those, and also bringing, I think, a little content from those programs into our reports each week. So I am looking forward to those getting going and to sharing them with everybody. And
so am I. So we're all looking forward for more Endless content. We're all looking forward to more streams. So I can't wait to see what that brings.
That Endless name just keeps paying dividends. Endless content,
exactly.
Endless streams.
I'm trying not to get too much punny with it, but it's hard not to make that kind of fun.
There's no hyperbole here whatsoever.
Exactly. So we're going to keep those streams coming. We're super excited to talk more about our projects and everything going on at Endless. So thank you so much to everyone who watched the Endless Report today. Thank you, Brian, again, for joining me once again. It's great to have you on the report again. And
always fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you again for everyone watching. That's about it for us. We're going to say that's a wrap for today's Endless Report, episode 11. So thank you again and take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.